introduce first is the members are Kyle Taylor, who's based in the United Kingdom. He's the founder and director of First Vote UK, an organization committed to democracy in a digital and data-driven world. He's also author of the Little Black Book on Data and Democracy. And if you're asking yourself questions such as, how did we go from 140 character tweets to attempted coups in less than 2 decades? Or how much data does Facebook really have on me? Or even, is my Amazon Alexa listening to me? Then this is absolutely the book for you. So thank you, Kyle, and welcome. And our next panelist is Oline Twiss. And Oline is Deputy Commissioner at the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner for British Columbia, the independent regulator that provides oversight and enforcement of BC's access and privacy laws. Oline absolutely loves to hear about the many ways that young people, teachers, and parents are engaging with digital technologies in privacy protective ways, and about the initiatives that flow from that engagement at the intersection of privacy, law, and policy. Again, welcome, Oline. And then our third panelist is Angelique Hamilton. Angelique has been working in privacy for over 20 years within the public sector, healthcare, and nonprofit settings in Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario, with a particular focus on responsible and ethical use of personal information. She is Chief Privacy Officer at Convergence.Tech, and Angelique, welcome to the conversation. The last 10 minutes of this panel discussion will be open for Q&A. And as you would have picked up on the chat line, if you can please submit your questions through the chat line, not through the Q&A button that we'd referenced to earlier. So Angelique, over to you.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Kyle and Oline, for joining us today. I am really looking forward to this. I know when I had an opportunity to chat with you prior, just to prepare for this, it made me put this on my calendar as a very exciting day. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I just wanted to maybe provide some opening remarks. It's funny, I'm moderating and I'm speaking, so let me know if I act too much like a speaker. Just give me a kick. But I just wanted to kind of kick things off by sharing something that I heard recently at a Responsible Tech event, and that was this: the data isn't actually the new oil; it's the new glitter. It's easy to accumulate, impossible to get rid of, found in places you least expect, and everyone wants to use it without thinking about the consequences. And I think that's a really apt way to, I think, describe the issues that we contend with in the area of data privacy. We know that data is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and the technologies that we're using now make it impossible for us to get rid of it. It's incredibly persistent, it's constantly self-replicating, and it's permeating in spaces and crevices that we can't even fathom. So in preparing for this session myself, I did two things. So I did a web search, which suddenly motivated my Facebook algorithm to ask me if I wanted to do some degrees in data monetization, data science, and so on, which I found fascinating. So the algorithm's on to me. And I was looking for privacy issues in education, and I found that there was a lot of attention paid to remote learning and issues of privacy related to that. But it really did hit me that the real issues in education are the same now as they were before the pandemic, and that's how do we teach and learn and prepare ourselves and students to navigate safely in a world that's really a multi-layered digital and networked world that's still largely unregulated, fairly opaque in terms of how data is used, but still has a voracious and unconstrained appetite for personal data. We aren't just using our phones and our laptops as data collection devices. We've wired our bodies, our cars, our homes to collect and use, monetize and buy and sell, incredibly intimate personal data, usually without our knowledge and consent. Obviously, privacy isn't really about locking information down. That's security. Privacy is about putting controls in place to make it possible for data to flow and to be used for good purpose without causing harm. And I think that's really what I hope this session is going to be about. Yeah, we have to acknowledge where we are and how we got here. And also acknowledge that we have some privacy enabling technology, some of which I know we'll be hearing about today, like digital credentials. And these are promising starts. But I was struck by something that Kathy O'Neill said in this Social Dilemma, and that was that AI isn't going to save us from AI. And I think that sentiment that technology isn't going to save us from technology, that change is not going to just spring up organically from within the tech sector rings very true. It probably explains why most people who we see on the speaking circuits around responsible and ethical use of technology are former employees of Google and Facebook. So, that's a little bit disheartening almost that there's technology is so, we think of so innovative and this sort of open-minded space, but I think there's some limitations to the model that has really been entrenched in the practice and the design of the products and services that we're currently using. So I'm wondering if today we can focus on, and I'd love to get your perspectives on how we get from a big data and technology business model that's focused on exploitation, extraction, profit, and control to one that's focused on human well-being, mutual care, shared benefit, sovereignty, and autonomy. I think it's doable. I think it can be done, but I think it's not going to be done by technology. It's going to be done by us. There's a role for educators to play. There's a role for students to play. There's a role for regulators, for activists, for those that are free to speak and free to innovate in ways that flip that model, that profit exploitative model, and start to reframe how we use technology, how we use data in a way that generates some common benefit. With that, as kind of an opener, I just want to start maybe with you, Oline. I think there's a perception, and I don't agree that it's a reality, but I think there's a perception that there's a sense of futility that's set in around personal privacy, data privacy, especially around young people, that they are complacent about their privacy or unaware of the long-term impact of how their personal data is currently being collected, used, analyzed, shared, and in some cases almost weaponized against them. And being used to influence their day-to-day lives. So why should young people care about their data privacy? And do educators, regulators, and tech companies have a duty to care as well? Like where would we start? Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Angelique. That's a really great question. Young people absolutely should and do care about their privacy, as do many of us. Privacy supports all sorts of things. Freedom from unwanted influence. It gives us space to dream and engage in those discussions with ourselves and others that allow us to really fully realize who we are. So I have a few comments I'd like to make. I want to thank you for those really interesting introductory comments and for setting the foundation there. It's a real pleasure to be here with you and Kyle today. My name, as you've said, is Oline Twiss. I'm Deputy Commissioner at the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner in British Columbia. And with respect, I want to acknowledge also the Lekwungen peoples, who are also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. That is the place where our office operates and where I live, work, and play. And I think in thinking about your question, we really want to start with, well, what is privacy? What does it mean to us? And we generally understand it to mean being free from observation or unauthorized intrusion. It can also be about control over our own personal information, as you mentioned. And if we stop to examine privacy, we can not only understand what it means, but why it's really meaningful to us. One of my favorite film scenes that really drives home the relationship between privacy and self-realization is featured in the 2005 popular film Crazy from Quebec filmmaker Jean-Marc Vallée. And it's a film about a young man named Zach. He's growing up in the suburbs of Montreal in the 60s and 70s, and he comes to realize he's gay over the course of the story. He has to deal with homophobia growing up in a very conservative family. There's 5 boys in the family. And in this scene, he's at home. He's lying on his bed in his room, and he's deep in thought, realizing for the first time that he has feelings for his cousin's boyfriend. And he's listening to a David Bowie song. And as he's listening, he gets up to sing along in front of the mirror. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door. And in that moment, we see Zach really see himself for one of the first times in the film. But his self-realization is cut short because one of his older brothers bursts into the room, knocks him over and yells at him, "Cut it out. People are going to think we're a bunch of idiots." And then the camera pans to Zach's window, where there are a number of older kids from the neighborhood out front. They've gathered and they've been watching, and they're pointing and laughing at Zach. And in an instant, we see that part of Zach that he got a glimpse of for the first time retreat. And this moment really clearly illustrates how critical the relationship is between privacy and self-realization. Harvard professors Gallison and Minow recognize privacy's value to self-expression in a paper called Our Privacy Ourselves in the Age of Technological Intrusions. They said, and I quote, "Privacy is closely connected with the emergence of a modern sense of self, and that its jeopardy signals serious risk to the very conditions that people need to enjoy the kind of self that can experiment, relax, form and enjoy intimate connections, and practice the development of ideas and beliefs for valued expression." Privacy also underpins healthy democracies. The ability to express our ideas and beliefs is a foundation for any democracy. And the Supreme Court of Canada has said the ability for individuals to control their personal information is intimately connected to their individual autonomy, dignity, and privacy. They're fundamental values at the heart of any democracy. So it seems that we can't think about privacy today, as you said, without talking about the technologies that permeate and animate our lives. Technologies that engage our personal information on a daily basis, whether we're a student, a parent, a teacher, or an administrator. And we connect with friends and loved ones over social media. We use smartwatches to monitor our fitness and our steps. And we do all sorts of things online. We take classes, visit doctors, we bank, we have wearable devices. And during COVID, many of us are downloading vaccine cards onto our mobile apps. Websites and applications can track our lives, our views, and our searches. And they do this, we're oft told, so that they can provide us with tailored services or advertising. But as you say, what is really going on behind the curtain? So I'll pause here for a moment and just talk about what the role of a regulator is in this environment. Here in BC, privacy is protected through laws that govern the relationship between individuals and their personal information on the one hand, and public and private sector entities on the other. They define personal information as information about an identifiable individual. And as a regulator, BC's Privacy Commissioner wears multiple hats to ensure that organizations and government bodies are managing personal information in a manner that is compliant with the laws. The Commissioner has powers to engage in education and research, conduct investigations, and make comments about compliance with the law. and has order-making powers to enforce those laws. Because we live in a technology-driven digital age, our office works hard to improve literacy about privacy in the digital world. And an important part of that involves knowing how to protect your personal information. So the data commissioners and privacy commissioners from around the world, in fact, gathered and passed a resolution calling on all members to promote digital literacy with an eye to fostering lifelong training in digital literacy around the world. They adopted an international competency framework on privacy education in order to support the training of educators and students in data protection and privacy education curricula. And from there, the commissioners in Canada asked themselves, okay, well, what then are the core learnings around digital privacy literacy? And together developed a series of 4 lesson plans aimed at grade school students. The plans address what kind of personal information is used and collected. They address the economic trade-off when you sign up for free apps and online services that make revenue from collecting and reselling personal information. They address why it's important to think critically about what personal information you share online, and they address basic privacy principles and the role of regulators. For example, what to do if you want to complain about how a government or a public body has managed your personal information. So we live in remarkable times for sure. Digital technologies are advancing so quickly that we all are having to learn about how they work together. Parents, students, educators. In our office, when we go back to the question of what's happening behind the curtain, for me, language like clouds and digital handshakes don't really help us better understand what's happening with our personal information. However, investigation reports from privacy regulators are a great source of information if you're trying to understand what is happening. And I think also places like the book from my co-panelists here are a great place as well. So privacy commissioners, when we initiate investigations, the resulting report can lift the veil on what's actually happening with how your personal information is being collected, used, or disclosed. So for example, last year, BC, Alberta, and the federal commissioner jointly investigated the use of facial recognition in malls by a large developer named Cadillac Fairview. And the report details how the company aimed to analyze the age and gender of shoppers by collecting photos of shoppers at information kiosks and then applying facial recognition software in order to estimate the age and gender of shoppers. The commissioners concluded that the company was offside of the law. Notice and consent is, of course, required to carry out an operation like that. Another joint investigation detailed how Facebook allowed an organization to use an app called This Is Your Digital Life to access the personal information of almost 100,000 British Columbians, more than 600,000 Canadians, and millions of others around the world. This was done without meaningful consent, among other concerns, and the commissioners again concluded offside of the law. A third joint investigation was prompted by stories that a company located here in BC called Aggregate IQ was improperly using voter information during the European Union referendum in the UK. And that report revealed the use of micro-targeted online profiling using social media. The commissioners found that this occurred without the consent of those whose personal information was involved. So we're also right now looking at the use of geolocation tracking in the Tim Hortons app, and you can watch our website for that report in the coming months. All of this is to say, these investigations underscore the need for law reform. The commissioner has recommended that the BC legislature amend privacy laws to round out requirements for what is meaningful consent, to require companies to use plain language and put in writing what their purpose for collection, use, or disclosure of an individual's personal information is, and that that information stand out rather than being buried in legalese. The commissioner has also recommended that any organization using automated processing of personal information be required to be transparent about using that automated processing and the reasons for it being used and the criteria for what the automated decisions are based on. They should also be required to address any objections or complaints from someone that arises. The commissioners also recommended strengthening enforcement powers to give the ability to levy administrative penalties, in particular cases where there are serious and willful violations or privacy breaches. So it does seem like there's something new to learn every day. There is for all of us. And I'm always thankful for people who are engaged in this area. I always learn a lot by talking with others. And I would encourage anybody to turn to some of the resources from our office or privacy commissioners' offices, lesson plans, investigation reports, or presentations on law reform as part of that lifelong learning process. And in doing so, you can help foster that engagement around protecting personal information.
Thank you, Oline. That was fantastic. And it's always I always remind myself as a dual national. I think Kyle and I both are U.S. and Canadian. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to expose that personal information there. You might have to take me to task on that. But I know, talking to my privacy colleagues in the U.S., one of the blessings of living in Canada is, from a privacy perspective, you can access a regulator and bring forward a privacy complaint as a citizen, at no cost. In the US, there's just not a similar kind of remedial platform that's so broadly accessible at no cost to individuals or groups that may take issue with how their data is being used. So, it's a lot cheaper to go to a commissioner's office than it is to file a lawsuit against a huge tech firm. And so it's good to know that, at least in Canada and elsewhere in the world, there are regulators who are better equipped to, take the fight to where it needs to go and have the means, to do that on our behalf. So I really want to thank you as the representative here of all regulators. I really want to thank you for the work that you do, and I know the enormous care, having chatted with many regulators in my day, that you actually take in what you do. Kyle, I know everybody's been plugging your book. Let me join the chorus. I got to get a sneak peek, and I actually bought my own copy of Kyle's book, which I'm sure he's going to mention again. And I know will be available to anyone who might be interested in making a purchase. But I just want to say, it was so refreshing to see something that was so highly accessible, because I do think that that's always been a problem for educators. Some people are right here, but some people just need a foothold, a starting point, and a way to facilitate that conversation in a way that's relatable, that's accessible, that's understandable. I think a lot of technology, it thrives behind opacity. It isn't all rocket science. It can be explained. Everything can be explained in understandable terms, and I'm thankful to you that you did that in your book as well. It's a great starting point for these discussions, especially with students and young folks. One of the things you said in your book was that opting out of technology is akin to opting out of society. It's not an option. So we have to demand that technology is made better. And it brings me back to that, the Washington Post has repurposed it, but that phrase, democracy dies in the dark, which actually first appeared in some pre-Watergate court decision that confirmed that the government cannot wiretap individuals without a warrant. Such sentiments might seem really quaint and naive post-Snowden and Cambridge Analytica. Where do we lose our way, and how do we get back some semblance of accountability, privacy, and sovereignty over our data? What is the role of students and educators, and why is this important?
Thank you so much for having me and for that question. And as well, Oline, I just have to say, from the global perspective, I work on tech regulation in lots of countries. Canada is absolutely leading the way, absolutely leading the way. And I think it's a really important thing to note, because the resources that you are providing are world leading. So thank you for that. I appreciate you sort of saying that my book is accessible, and that was the whole point of it for all the reasons that you said. And just before I get to the when do we lose our way, I think I just want to say that I think the reason the accessibility is so important is, for me, was because I was born on the fringe of the analog and digital world. I learned to type on a typewriter, but I also owned the first iPhone. And that has offered a really unique perspective on these changes. I've been a practitioner in politics, I've worked on legislation and government, and I've advocated from the sidelines, as I do now, on behalf of civil society. And I really believe that digital rights are an emerging frontier in the civil rights space. So where do we lose our way? We were entirely unprepared for the pace of change because it's something we've never experienced before. The rate at which technology has changed, we've experienced more change in the last 10 years than in the previous 100. And I'll just give you one example. Somebody born in 1920 would have been photographed on average 700 times in their life. Someone born in 2020 is likely to be photographed 700 times in the first 3 days of their life. This is an immeasurable scale of change. And what that is showing us, and what we're realizing now, is that data is power. It's the power to influence, the power to sell, and ultimately the power to control. And what's missing from the current power dynamic is, as Oline said, is informed consent, and in turn, a realistic ability to opt out and still participate. Because digital inclusion is bordering on being a basic human right. If you can't get online, you can't really exist in the modern world. And so what's missing is choice. And almost all of these digital spaces are privatized. All of their products are often seemingly free, but if you're not paying for the product, then you probably are the product. From Facebook to Google, Twitter, Amazon, baby growth tracking apps, mental health meditation apps, health and fitness apps, smart speakers, and even smart fridges now. They're building your data profile to sell your attention, your time to advertisers, and often without your explicit plain language opt-in. A great example, we just saw Facebook release, in conjunction with Ray-Ban, their smart glasses. And one of the features is that there's cameras built in looking around as you look. Well, that means that if you're on the street, or you're in a building or in a restaurant and these glasses are looking at you, you're now being recorded. Your privacy is gone without your consent. And from the moment you check your phone in the morning, you're giving away your data. When you woke up, how you slept, how many times you hit snooze. It's like the automated version of somebody sort of peering in through your window and watching your every move. It's all consuming and it's all pervasive. In fact, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp have upwards of 52,000 data points on most users. Your likes, your interests, your behaviors, how long you hold over a post, even your face. One of their tools, Deepface, uses uploaded photos to assess facial features so that it can predict what someone not only looks like now, but what they will look like in the future. This data can be shared among companies themselves as well as with governments. And because, as you'd said at the introduction, data is so easily replicable, sort of glitter, it's difficult to trace. It's impossible to know who has what. But the flip side of that is, if data is power, as such, the inverse must also be true. Privacy is power. Privacy matters because it's how you're able to exercise authority and autonomy in the world. Privacy is freedom. It is essential that we defend that freedom. And so to the second point of your question, how do we get it back? Well, the responsibility is on different levels. There is an individual level of responsibility, and that's about taking your privacy seriously in your settings, on your devices, what tools you choose to engage with. Opt out or opt over. Is there a less intrusive way to do what I'm doing? Opt over is the way I sort of describe, is there something you can go over to that gives you the same functionality, but without the invasiveness in your usage? Apps like Signal or simply saying I'm only going to use one social networking tool. And of course, as Oline has talked about, and what is so central to this day and this conference is educating yourself. Digital literacy is essential. And the key that I would say is to be suspect of the source, right? So if you're getting Instagrams, we take your privacy seriously, click here and read our practical guide to privacy. Remember the objective of that entity, as opposed to resources that come from the Information Commissioner, whose remit is built on protecting your privacy. The source is so important because their interests are different. And the last area of this individual responsibility is about advocating to your institutions and your governments to defend your rights en masse. Why is that so essential? Because the private companies are not operating as free markets, right? We're looking at a majority of large engagement on social media being through monopolies. In the UK, Google is responsible for 91% of all searches. Facebook is responsible for 89% of all social media interactions. So it's very difficult to use the traditional levers of market forces to change behaviors. You don't really have a choice. And as I said, logging off has been made to be not an option that really sort of entraps us, especially when these things are required. And what happens with that dependency? Well, if you look at Australia, there was a law being floated around requiring Facebook to pay for news content. So in response, Facebook turned off news access in Australia, just like that. And 80% of Australians said they got a majority of their news through Facebook. And in that shutdown, accidentally, they turned off bushfire notifications and emergency services and other vital resources that governments had just sort of put on Facebook and used as the tool. The power and the scale of their power is immeasurable. Facebook has 2.8 billion daily active users. That's almost twice the number of people that live in China. And this is global. So yes, data is absolutely glitter, and I think that's a great comparison. Where the comparison with oil is important is that data is now the most valuable commodity on Earth. And these products are dangerous, right? If Starbucks was selling a product, a coffee that made people sick, it'd be off the shelves immediately and there'd be repercussions. We know that social media and these tools are making us sick. We know that they have facilitated genocides. We know that they're addictive. We know they're affecting body image in young people. So where is that health response for a dangerous product? And that pressure has to be on institutions and governments. What you can do is demand protections, transparency, independent, accountable oversight. Don't let harm pay. Don't give certain users extra power to speak when their speech is potentially the most harmful. Make sure all users are created equal. And the last thing I'll say is use your offline power to drive online change. So learn, do the literacy work, but don't think that tweeting about something is going to change it. We still have to pressure our governments and our elected representatives to work on our behalf in the face of this insurmountable challenge. And for young people, something we often hear in the work that I do is that if I'm not doing anything wrong, what does it matter? But what happens when the primacy of data and the faith in it leads to a fundamental shift in how your relationship with the state and with justice works? The old way that it worked is somebody says, the police, the state, they say, we're alleging that you've done this bad thing. We're alleging that you've broken this law. And you say, prove it. But with technology, it's becoming the opposite. Because of tracking and tracing and geolocating, we're being told slowly more and more, we believe that you've done this. You prove to us you didn't. And that fundamental shift is a fundamental attack on our freedoms. And the root of that is privacy. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share this and discuss and answer questions.
Good. Angelique, I've been tracking some questions, and Kyle and Oline, thank you so much for sharing your insights. We've got time for one question in particular, and this comes from Sharon Polsky. When children have no say and no alternative about what privacy-busting technologies their schools require them to use, how can children, and perhaps indeed parents, exercise any right to privacy?
That's a great question. And you know, I don't think there's a lot of magic here. It's the same as in any circumstance. You need people, as we've been talking about, doing advocacy work. In British Columbia, young people who are able to understand what's happening to their personal information are in a position where they can consent to what's happening. Children, of course, it's their parents that are the proxy for that. So any parent or young person that has a concern can raise complaints about that to privacy commissioner offices, but also can engage in education in their environment. And, you know, these legislative reform committees that I've referenced, they're open to the public, they're open to everyone. So it's funny, I'm listening to what Kyle's saying as well, and I'm thinking there's no magic. It's like anything. We live in a democracy, and if we want to shape the world that we live in, and if we want our laws to reflect the world and the values that we have, then we need to engage.
Okay, thank you, Oline. Kyle, any
comments
to that?
Yeah, I just add that you know, here in the UK, the age-appropriate design code just came into force, which was a huge push specifically around children, and it sets a duty of care, a basic level that private companies who are providing services to children must meet. And it's just a great example of as Elaine says, the need to, pressure can return results for you in a democratic society.
Great, thank you. That's great guidance in response to that question. And Kyle, Oline, and Angelique, thank you all. And Angelique, thank you for hosting the panel as well. Really appreciate it.